1-2, swinging a drive toward right center. Back goes Robert, back near the stands. That ball is gone. A game-winning home run for Chris Morel. Can you believe it? Listen to this crowd.
Welcome back to the Brotherly Cubs podcast. I am your little brother, Zach. That is my big brother, John. We are your brothers who love everything Cubs baseball. If you enjoy self-torture and watching the roller coaster that is the Chicago Cubs, then hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and join us every week as we dive into the power, the speed, and the 8th best team in the National League wildcard race.
We like to start off each podcast with a playful question for all 103 of our subscribers. Before we get to the playful question, we like to shout out all of our subscribers and thank you guys for listening to us here on the Brotherly Cubs podcast. Today, Zach, I ask you, what's more awkward? Christopher Morel saying goodbye to all of the runners he left in scoring position and back in the dugout as he was traded, or Counsell's retort to Jesse Rogers asking about Morel swinging for the lake?
I think Counsell just doing that, and then it's awkward because he did swing for the lake. I mean, that's what he did the whole time. But I do like the other option there, Morel saying goodbye to the players he left in scoring position. That's brilliant. I don't think that's awkward necessarily, but it is clever. What are you thinking about that?
I just thought it was funny because you're watching him. I was watching him, say goodbye or whatever on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot our third base coach.
Willie Harris?
Yeah, Willie Harris. Like, he gave him like a hug, and then he passed somebody. I don't know who it was. Was it Napoli? I think it was Napoli.
Mm-hmm.
Like Napoli. And then there was like an awkward, like it looked like they had some kind of a goodbye or some kind of a like a handshake or something like that, but he just kind of looked at him and then like did it or whatever, and then he just kind of smiled and then just kept walking, and like Mike Napoli did, and then he said goodbye to some other person. So I think he said goodbye to like 3 people, and then he was like, "Okay, guys, I guess I'll leave now."
Right?
And everyone's like, "Okay, yeah, all right. No, don't forget your bat. No, not that
Your
one.
stuff.
The other one."
Yeah. That is kind of awkward.
He just like knocks over a bunch of stuff.
Leaving in the middle of a game is certainly
in the middle of a game.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, I don't know how that works. Like, because he was I guess they were batting, and then he was traded, or he was announced that he was traded. I don't know how that works if you're in the field. Like, you just have to come out.
Wasn't he? I thought Bodie was at third base, right?
I don't even know. I just saw
Reagan's. Yes, like Cole Reagan's was pitching, so they had like their lefty guys who could match lefties lineup.
That's how much you could tell. Well, I wasn't even watching the game.
Yeah, Morel should have been in that lineup if you're really playing a match lefties. But Counsell was like, oh, he's getting traded. It's a deal, I don't know.
I mean, you would think Counsell would already know.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, that's just awkward to be in the middle of a game playing. Like, it's one thing if you're sitting on the bench, but I guess that just goes back to the communication between GM and the manager. So, anywho, Cubs are now sitting at 51-56 after today's win over the Royals. They're 5 games back of 500. I had mentioned, in order for them to become buyers, essentially, they should get to 500 or a little better by the deadline. They didn't quite reach that goal. They did win 2 out of 3 from Kansas City this weekend. They lost 2 of 3 to the Brewers previously, and 2 of 3 to the Diamondbacks. They lost 2 of 3 to the D-bags. So my question, Zach, for you is, what the hell are we even doing with this season anymore? I can't get a grip on it, because it's like I didn't tune into the Royals especially after that first game, right? Like, we lost 0-6. I'm like, yeah, this offense is in the toilet. And then I think I might have tuned into like the last few innings of yesterday's game, and then today I definitely didn't see that we won, and I was surprised.
Yeah.
But what are we doing, right? Like, we lost 2 of 3 to the Brewers. Huge. Those are huge games. 2 of 3 to the Diamondbacks, who are ahead of you in the wild card race. At both of those series, Diamondbacks and Brewers at Wrigley. it's like, what are we doing with this season? I can't make sense of.
Well, why don't you tell the listeners why we're confused?
I'm confused.
Trades we
I'm
made.
confused. Yeah. So today, the Cubs did trade for, I don't know how to say it because I've heard a different Isaac Paredes.
Mm-hmm.
And then they gave up Christopher Morel, Hunter Bigge, and Ty Johnson, a relief pitching prospect.
Mm-hmm.
Some are saying, they gave up on Morel too early. His value is really low, like you were saying that.
Mm-hmm.
I know Sam Olber was saying that Christopher Morel's value is extremely low.
Yeah.
He's batting under the Mendoza line.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called? Meridian. Line.
The new Mendoza line is a 700 OPS in my opinion, or maybe it's like 680 with this year at the freaking D-Juice ball where the 650 OPS is now good. I don't know, but yeah.
So that's
I was just not
gonna say that's where I'm confused at what we're doing here. Like, you want to win ball games, obviously, but it's like as a fan, you're kind of like, well, you just beat the Royals. I mean, you just took that series from the Royals. They beat the Orioles. Royals and Orioles, saying that same. Those two teams.
The Royals.
The Royals. It's
the Oreos.
The Oreos. The Oreos. Both of those teams are great, right? I mean, they're good.
Yeah.
They're good quality teams, and I'm just confused at like, the run support. Like we had 0 runs one day. What was it? Friday or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday, I think they won. Was it 5-? I forgot what the score was. They had more than 0.
Yeah.
And now they had 7? I think it was 7-4 Sunday. So it's like, I'm just so confused at our offense and our I don't know.
The Cubs have a very good record against interleague games this year. It's like 14-5 or something.
We have the best versus the AL, which is like so confusing. I saw that in the tweet. Someone had sent that. I was like, what? That can't be us.
Yeah, we're one of the best teams in the major leagues against AL in 19 games.
So if we make it to the World Series, we should be just fine.
If the Cubs squeeze in, well, as the Ricketts, Pickett's, and Jed Hoyer want us to at 85 wins, we have a good chance of just going to 7 games or going, 5 games in those early series, and then we'll sweep the AL team in the World Series. It's interesting the move they made there. I mean, they also you mentioned here in the show notes getting Pearson from the Blue Jays, kind of a lower profile move. Yeah, low risk, lower profile move. They must really like Blue Jays relievers because they previously got Merryweather from the Blue Jays as like a DFA offseason type guy. And Pearson is a similar profile. And then, so that was a weird one. They gave up Penyango and Rivera. Penyango makes sense to give up on. Outfielder at, just getting up to Tennessee, been in that same kind of boat for a while. And then Rivera being a 3rd round pick, that's a little more interesting, like a recent 3rd round pick. Usually you don't give up on that quickly. They also gave up on Jackson Ferris and that Michael Busch deal a little quickly as a 2nd round pick. So that's a little bit more like, eyebrow raising to give up on these early round picks in recent trades. But obviously the big one is getting as you mentioned, an all-star 3rd baseman. I mean, you're paying more, and if there's competition to get Isaac Paredes, then in order to beat out that competition, you have to you've got to give up more, right? And part of that, the word more is right there in the last name of Christopher Morel. And it's got to be a Big E package. And so right there, I just came up with that a second ago.
The Rays are on the phone trying to hint to Jed Hoyer.
We little Morel.
We want Morel. A little Biggie package.
I don't know if their GM is Italian.
Are you? So are you hinting at Christopher Morel and Hunter Bigge? Yes. And you throw in a Johnson.
We're like, which
Ty
Johnson? Give us your least favorite Johnson. It's like, okay. Yeah, the Ty Johnson part's great, but Christopher Morel, if it was just a Morel for Paredes package, that wouldn't have worked. And so, yeah, you're giving up on Morel a little early and at the lower end of his value. But
Right.
yeah, like you said, the Cubs are doing well against AL teams and playing. This is not a team the reason this is so confounding is that the Cubs have now made 2 buy-side trades before they made a selling trade. So it looks as if they're buying, but
Right.
believe me, they're, like you mentioned, they need to get to 500 at the trade deadline.
Least,
The trade
yeah.
deadline's in a few days. They are 6, or 5 games under 500. So clearly they're not in a strong contention. But I think what this does is sort of give them a chance to compete in out years. And ironically enough, that's kind of what Jed Hoyer said. I mean, everyone interpreted that as selling, and what I interpreted that was he may sell, but he also may make a deal where he improves his odds for the future. And by God, he actually did it. He got a third base. He locked in a position for next year.
Right.
That's important to do.
Yeah,
So,
they have a lot of holes, or a few holes, I would say. Third base being one of them. Right field, Suzuki has just looked like trash. We can talk about that later as well. Defensively, at least.
defensively, yeah.
Yeah. So third base, right field, and catcher? I mean, 3 big positions. So I mean, you fill up, third base. Really, now all you're looking at is, I mean, depending on what else they do, and if they sell, Horner, I guess you can move. I mean, you can move people. Like you can move Bush to second, and then maybe find another first baseman.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, so now you're really looking at, you got Paredes, for third base. Now maybe call up Owen Casey. I think you mentioned we have 1 or 2 to 40 man.
Well, Pearson is going to get added to the 40 man directly. In my opinion, I'm guessing because he was originally a 40. He's going to get added. So I don't think there is a present.
Okay.
There's not a present 40 man roster spot, but they're going to do a lot of shuffling. And part of that is with the trade deadline is you're going to see that even in the minor leagues, you're going to see guys move up. You've got the draft that happened. Guys might go to Arizona, and guys might get shifted as the ACL ends. Guys will get shifted to Myrtle, and then that will create a shift, as well as the trade deadline, as well as being a selling team and wanting to see what you've got. So Shaw to AAA. Potentially, you might see Ballesteros here at the end of the season. I don't know. And then Casey, can you see him play right? And then, like you said, Seiya to DH instead of the Seiya. The Seiya being a not good defender thing was just briefly thought of last year, but that's really been a bold, that's been a bold statement that's been a major piece this year that's fallen apart is the Cubs defense in right field. And they're going to have to lock that back in next year in order to maintain that value, because Seiya playing bad defense in right field, despite his good hitting, it gives them several things to make up. And yeah, defensively, offensively, the bottom last 3 spots in the lineup. I mean, you might solve some defense in center field, which is very helpful with PCA, but then all of a sudden he's not the hitter you thought he was, at least so far. But that's a whole other tangent. We could talk about this for hours, but the offense has to improve. And Paredes, getting him there, just to mention it, Christopher Morel has a career 105 WRC, or sorry, OPS plus, which is just ridiculously mediocre for what you think. I mean, last year he had an 821 OPS, which is a 119, 19% better than league average. So Morel looked like a star last year, a 500 slug in 400, 29 plate appearances. This year he has just virtually all 3 years he's played, he's put up the same amount of at bats. And so he went above average, to nicely above average to below league average this year, like by a lot. I mean, his OPS dropped 100, almost 150 points. I mean, so his power was still there. If you look at that power number, the slug is still there. That's what the Rays they're buying onto, and the walk was there. The strikeout rate went down, but aside from, he only has 7 doubles. I mean, that is not good. I mean, we're more than halfway through the season. You might end up with 10 doubles. So,
I mean, if you look at Paredes' extra base hits, I think he had like, what was it? Is it in the 40s or something like that? Like he's a really good hitter. I mean, it's really solid hitter. I think that's really probably the operative word here that you're going to hear throughout the podcast. Many Cubs podcasts is Paredes is solid, right? That's all you really need. You need someone to hold it down at third base. It's fine if he was an all-star this year. So it's fine if, he's not a superstar and he's not slugging the way that, that Christopher Morel does, slug every now and then. I think his approach is just better in general. Isaac Paredes.
I mean,
Isaac Paredes.
However you slice it with his name, he's got a clear trend up. I mean, the Cubs did trade him away years ago. 6 or 7 years ago, before he was like a prospect that showed promise to even get to the big leagues. And he has a clear trend up since his Tigers days to his first year at the Rays. His last 3 years, he's been above average, and he's improved. And even this year, like you mentioned, he was an all-star, and he fell off a cliff this month. And he still has an almost 800 OPS. So that just shows you that he's not just solid, he's a very good hitter. And he plays, solid to league average defense at third, which is what would they need? They need an everyday third baseman. It was either going to be Matt Chapman, it was going to maybe be Chris Morel, or it was going to be possibly, Matt Shaw, or it's going to be Alex Bregman. It had to be one of those 4 guys, right?
Right.
Bregman as a free agent, Matt Chapman was an option for free agent this year. That could have been a good idea. I don't know. I haven't really looked at his numbers. He's a great defender, but Matt Shaw is still blooming. He's going to be a good player, but we don't know what his defense is like. He's athletic. Morel is athletic. So there was a thought there that he could stick, and they weren't able, Madrigal was able to learn third. Morel did improve throughout the year. So maybe the Rays think they can unlock something like they always do. But this is a proven product. This is different even than the Michael Busch trade, which was a bet, and that's a bet that worked out.
And it was a little sketchy at first,
But he's proven to be essentially Seiya and Busch. I mean, those are the top, and now Paredes will be your number. This is going for the future, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I mean, you got the hot corners locked down, right? You got third base, you got first base now.
Finally, Frank Schwindel and Patrick Wisdom.
I could have sworn Schwizdom. I could have sworn that was.
I got a jersey that says Schwindel. No one is. That's not like Rizzo. It's the opposite of it.
It's the opposite, yeah. But yeah, solid third baseman. There's only a couple more holes, like I said. Right field, maybe catcher, and obviously you want Dansby as a shortstop. Looking just kind of look at the infield still. Just Dansby, you wish he played a little bit better, hit a little bit more. It's not been too terrible, but I mean, I don't know. Yeah, for paying a guy, what is it, $170 million, whatever, $170 plus $1 million. It's like that's obviously a glaring issue. So you want to pay someone like that to be your captain that's producing, but sometimes it happens. You pay guys because you have to pay them.
Jesse Rogers made a really good point discussing with Patrick Mooney on the newer podcast that The Athletic has called Northside Territory. But Jesse Rogers made a really good point that as a leader, when the Cubs, let's say, had an Anthony Rizzo, that was a guy who could hit and then also could command the locker room. But when you have Dansby Swanson, who acts like a leader, but he's not hitting well, it's possible that it's a little harder to take him seriously. And last year, he actually was just a little bit over league average. And so we'd like to have seen more from him last year, like give me a 750, 760 OPS. This year he's below 700.
Yeah.
So even below, I think like 680, like he's just barely hanging on there. Worse than Morel, I think. So as we've talked about endlessly, the offense fell off a cliff this year. So they're going to have to try and figure that out. But if they can even just improve a little bit next year, having a surefire third baseman next year will at least stabilize, that middle part of the lineup. Even if he batted 7th, which he'll obviously bat higher than that, but even if you end up improving this team and he batted 7th, that dramatically improves the lower portion of the lineup.
Right. So talking about improving the lineup or improving the big league squad here, Zach, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the Cubs as far as these next 2 days? Who could they possibly sell? Or who might you want them to sell? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
I like what CHGO did with this exercise. They sort of ranked them.
Okay.
And so in kind of a way, I also ranked them. I just tried to get my best, foot forward. And as we discussed offline, I now think, even though Jameson Taillon is having a great season, which now his deal looks a little bit more affordable given how expensive pitching is, I think the Cubs actually may hold on to him just because they no longer have a 6th or 7th starter that's healthy, just due to the rash of injuries that have come up this year. It may make a little bit more sense to hang on to him a little bit longer if they even want to try and compete this year. But I feel like what would make sense to give, as Bellinger's getting healthier, PCA, you want to give him a lot of at bats as a team that's not competing. Trade Mike Tauchman and let him give up his spot as a DH / 4th outfielder. And you're not going to get a lot back for him. It's not like, oh boy, I can't wait to see what top 100 prospect. But you can allow, that opens up a spot for Owen Casey.
Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know, maybe we'll fact check later, but Owen Casey would be Rule 5 eligible in November due to you need 4 years after you turn 18 to make it onto the 40-man roster. So he was traded in 2020 when I think he was, 18 or 19. So at that point, Owen Casey would be added to the roster anyways in November. So all you're doing is you're really just adding him a few months early and giving him a chance to get a couple months of data, right? A couple months more of data for Owen Casey to figure out what to work on for him in the offseason and give him a chance maybe to play right field and shift Seiya to DH. Now that third base has now that Morel is not going to be your almost everyday DH, because the other thing in the offseason was, do you get a third baseman and do you move Morel to DH? Now that you've moved Morel, Paredes is locked in at third. Now you can open up the DH for Seiya, who is a good hitter. So I think Tauchman makes sense to trade. I think trading one of your lefty specialists, which, that might include Drew Smiley as a lefty that gets lefties and righties out, or trading Mark Leiter Jr., who's been unstoppable since he came back from the injury list. Like eight shutout innings. He basically pitched a shutout, complete game shutout, since he's gotten back with like 12 strikeouts in 8 innings. So, or 14. I don't know. He has like 14 strikeouts in 8 innings since he's been back. So Mark Leiter Jr. might command the one of the better returns because he's going to be highly sought after.
Right.
Neris would make sense to not have to pay him his deal. Again, more opportunities for your young bullpen. Obviously, I wanted Hunter Bigge to get in there, but they've just traded him.
Right.
So I would say trade some of those bullpen arms. Maybe trade Smiley. You trade Tyson Miller. Their bullpen is now good. So now there's a chance for them to actually lock in some of that value and get something back as a seller. We've, Tauchman, and then possibly if they can figure out maybe if they can trade Taillon for a major league ready starting pitcher, or pick up like Adrian Hauser off waivers as a former Brewer that played with Craig Counsell. I don't know, but maybe they'll trade Taillon if they find someone on waivers to be a starter just to eat innings. They're going to need to eat innings. I mean, they're not fully healthy yet.
I could see if they can get a good deal, like if it's the Yankees. I don't think, was it the Yankees that traded for someone?
They traded for
starting
Jazz
pitcher?
Chisholm.
Oh yeah, no. There was another starting pitcher. that was acquired. I can't remember who it was, but
Zach
I was like,
Eflin went to the
oh,
Orioles.
that's who it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there still could be a trade to be had with the Yankees and Jason Dominguez, but I don't know. I don't know if they're willing to part with him. And, I mean, he struggled a little bit this year. Not having as great of a year as last year, but I think if you package maybe Tyone and maybe Mark Leiter Jr.,
Right.
and then you could for sure probably net, Jason Dominguez.
Well,
I think it could happen. I think if you make the package enticing enough without, obliterating your bullpen, the flip side of these trades is like, okay, well, what do you have for next year, right? Like, going into the bullpen, it's like, oh, at the time it looked great. Going into 2025, you want to have a somewhat of a decent bullpen. I mean, we found out, this year earlier on, our bullpen was pretty crappy. So, but going back to the Rule 5 real quick, Zach. Yeah, he is. Owen Casey is Rule 5 this year in November. So
perfect. Yeah, I mean, I would
along with Burl Caraway.
Yeah, he's just been it was one of the worst draft classes, or at least for the Cubs, it's one of the worst drafted years I've ever seen. I mean, you got Ed Howard, who's now starting to do better.
He's eligible.
Everyone in 2020. Burl Caraway, a second round pick, should have made it by now. Luke Little turned out to be really good. He was the best one from that draft class. Jordan Wogu, he flamed out pretty quickly, and then obviously Cohen Moreno was, I think he might be at South Bend, but 4 years to get to South Bend is, and same thing for Howard with injuries for him, of course, but that's just ridiculous. Matt Mervis was actually undrafted in that class.
Other notables, Wally Soto, no, Marino Santi.
I mean,
Johendrick Penango.
Oh, 2020. Okay, there you go.
Hunter Bigge. So again, traded. Those.
I thought he was 2019.
Traded. No, he's on this list from thanks to NorthsideBound.com.
Wow. Well, you have some show notes here about what are the Cubs going to do, and I'm still not sure I know what they're going to do. I have a list here of who we think they should sell, which is what a logical GM would do. But there's been two buy-side trades.
Yeah.
So, the theory would go you would sell. I think the selling will get here. I don't know if this was Jed trying to save his job or something.
Right. That's what I thought, honestly. I thought, like, this sounds like the Paredes deal sounds like he's trying to. I think Sam mentioned this too. Sam Olberon, Locked On, was saying that Matt was telling him, well, this could be one of those trades where it's like, they told Jed, we need to be better, starting with third base. Like, we need to just shore it up already and not just go into the season like, what are we doing? So yeah, keep going. Sorry.
I don't like. I'm kind of at a loss for words because when you make those, not the Pearson deal, but the Paredes deal looks like a win now move. You're going off of a guy having a bad season, going on to a guy who's an all-star. It's not very often you trade for an all-star in the same season that you sell a bunch of pieces. It just,
or you're projected to sell. Yeah.
Right. I wanted to point out Counsell's quote. It's not a this or that. There's a big misconception about trade deadlines that they're this or that. It's a mistake. I think it's an easier story to write. It's either this or that. So it's funny how they're starting to kind of hint that they don't want to sell, even though the media thinks it makes sense. And they might do a little bit of both. So that's kind of what Counsell said. Jed said there's an eye on 2025. So I think they'll do a little bit of both. I wanted to point out in 2022, the Brewers, when the Brewers traded for Hader for Esteury Ruiz for the Padres, then they flipped him later on in the offseason. First of all, when they traded Hader, they actually finished a game short of the playoffs, but still 86 wins.
Yeah.
So they still competed, even trading their closer. And then also when they flipped Esteury Ruiz for William Contreras and Joel Payamp. So you can see how the Cubs might make a trade, and then in the offseason, maybe they'll flip someone later. Or, maybe that's what Counsell is trying to get the front office to do, is be creative. And so, the Brewers essentially traded Hader for a few pieces, and then also traded Hader for essentially William Contreras, their all-star catcher, and Joel Payamps, whose career 3.22 ERA is a reliever. So they did unlock value that way too. It just took them a couple years to really receive it, right? So I'm not saying the Cubs need to make a move like that, but I'm actually wondering if that's something that they might be more aggressive in the offseason. Or they'll just let Jesus take the wheel, and because I don't know what they're gonna do. So,
yeah,
but
it's. I was just gonna comment real quick. Yeah, that Brewers trade was one of the more confusing trades I think I've ever. The Brewers trade for when they traded Josh Hader. That was one of the more confusing trades I've ever. You're
that's
competing for a division. I just did not understand it. Oh, lucky cat. My parents' dog is trying to play with me right now. He sees me getting worked up over here. And it's just...
happens to me at work all the time with my cats. So if the Cubs do become buyers, is there any pieces you think that they should do, even if they make some minor additions to the team?
I would have liked a catcher for the future. I would have liked Elias Diaz.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's one of the more solid available catchers. I don't know how what the price would be. I think if you entice the Rockies with enough outfielder prospects, you could probably get the deal done.
Yeah.
So a catcher and maybe which would provide a little bit more offense too.
Yeah.
With Paredes and Diaz and maybe, but see, that's for the future though, right? That's for now and for the future. It's just confusing, because I don't know if they really want to add a few more pieces and see, hey, can we make a run here? Because it's just confusing. I don't know what Jed sees is what is the vision? That's what I want to know. I don't even know. Don't ask me. I don't know. That was a terrible question for me. I'm I don't know. I'm answering a question with a question.
I've asked the impossible. Yeah. I mean, I think we're all confused right now. It would have been a lot easier if they just made the deals we thought they were going to.
Because it's they need a closer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they have options, but they need a closer. I think the pressing need really is the offense.
Mm-hmm.
Because the bullpen has kind of taken form a little bit over this last month or so. So I mean, ideally, I would trade for a big bat to really get the offense. If you're trying to sneak into the playoffs, maybe maybe a big bat.
Right.
Because Bellinger's not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, maybe just make room for people to come up too. I don't know. Maybe that's how you do it as well. Get some spark from the younger guys too.
If we could trade for Jason Dominguez
mm-hmm.
and maybe Taillon and a reliever for Jason Dominguez, I think that'd be a big trade for the Cubs. And because I'm not expecting much. Our starting would go, starting pitching would basically go in the toilet. There's not a whole lot of other options that would be available after we trade Taillon. So I mean, I don't have even though we took that series from the Royals, I just don't have enough faith in this group right now. So I would think for the future, if they could put together a package for Jason Dominguez, I think that'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm struggling to see. It looks like he had a good season in 2023.
Right. I mentioned that. But this year he kind of fell off a little bit. So you could maybe get him, for not a crazy price, because he's, there's not a lot of.
I mean, yeah, you'd hope so. If he's having a bad season.
Yeah. But there's potential there. There's a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
Young, controllable talent, right? That's what they're always looking for.
Yeah.
So, and even if you have to eat some of the Taillon deal,
they would certainly have to. Yeah.
Yeah, that frees up. We talked about this on the phone as well. That frees up maybe a chance to go out and sign an ace, push Steele to the 2, Imanaga to the 3, and then maybe who else? Who else would be in our rotation after we trade Tejon? Maybe Brown or
Wicks,
Wicks, yeah. And that's awesome. Like Steele is your number 2. I see Steele as like a number 2. I don't know if he's like a true you go into the postseason with Steele as your number 1, but I think he could be a really solid 2.
Yeah,
and Imanaga as the 3, I think that'd be dangerous. And then if you upgrade the offense a little bit, I think you'd be, in position.
Yeah.
So, but that could be a lot to ask for. It's easy to say it. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like a whole lot of people want to come to Chicago. Besides Swanson.
I mean, they'd have to go out and this is the year to make a deal for a starting pitcher with Max Fried available. Corbin Burns is a
now. Don't you start with Max Fried?
I think he got injured again.
Yes, he did.
Corbin Burns is available, but he's a Boris client. So there's a few really good starting pitchers available that they could seize on and get for 40 M's per year by freeing up the Tyone and Hendricks deals. Just convert those two into one, maximum max slot essentially for a starter. They need to believe in spending that kind of money on an ace. And if they did, then that's a formidable 1 through 3 if they had Burns, Steele, and Imanaga. Easily be one of the better rotations in the bigs. The depth behind it with Horton and others would certainly help. And then, but the bigger issue is just getting a couple more bats, like you said, at catcher, and then, who knows what other, do they need to trade Nico and upgrade at second, or trade someone else and upgrade in right field? Yeah, I don't know, but it almost feels like they need to consolidate for a star hitter, like a Juan Soto type hitter.
Right.
That could play right field, could be a left-handed power bat.
And that shifts everybody back into a more suited role, right? You're not having Bellinger as like your slugger that you have to, he has to slug and he has to. I feel like he was more effective when he was, 2-strike approach and just slapping it into left field and, going the other way. And he was just kind of finding ways to get a hit and not necessarily, his slug might have went away a little bit last year, but he was just finding ways to be a great hitter, to find timely hitting or timely hits. And so
he also slugged pretty well too, even though he missed some time.
But I'm just saying, he fell off. His approach definitely changed, compared to what was it, 18 or 19, when he had those MVP years.
He did have 26 homers and 97 RBIs last year, so he was objectively a really productive hitter in that sense, and only 9 homers this year, although in 344 plate appearances. So clearly he's missed a lot of time, but he's not slugging nearly as much as he did. I mean, having a 500 slugging versus 400, I mean, that's a massive difference as to what you want as in a middle of the order hitter.
Right.
So him falling off too, not necessarily falling off a cliff, but falling off just enough to no longer be a middle of the order hitter, that moves everyone back as well, or that makes everyone else need to step up,
Right. And people have talked, CHGO has talked about this, Locked On Cubs has talked about this. They need to acquire an absolute slugger that what you're going to get from this guy. 40 home runs, 100 RBI, 110 RBI. You can bank on it. That's just what they're going to produce year after year, and their average isn't too terrible. Even though I know you're not really worried about average too much, but you don't want a all or nothing kind of guy too. So So real quick, Zach, what are you kind of mentioned that Nico Horner, you kind of touched on that. Who do you think could possibly replace him if he gets traded? Because his name was obviously mentioned with Seattle, like a Luis Vasquez, or
I think Matt Shaw is, well, in the interim, you could have Bush try and play second if you're not trying to win any games, and then shift Bellinger over to first. But next year, if Nico got traded next year, Matt Shaw would essentially be your second baseman.
Okay.
And I think he's more rotated as the bench, like a bench player, for just to get him acquainted. But yeah, I mean, I think he's one of the best candidates to play second on this team.
Yeah, that's just really interesting. I think that's going to be a name to watch. I think there's going to be a lot of contenders that are going to try and, pry him away. Is there an untouchable? Last question, Zach, before we wrap it up here. Is there an untouchable for you? Like the Cubs had not mentioned. That was one thing that Sam Olber from Locked On was mentioning was that it's kind of an insult that Steele's name wasn't mentioned from like Carter Hawkins in a recent interview as an untouchable. Do you have an untouchable? Like you're not trading him, or do you have probably multiple?
I mean, Steele is he is like peak value because he's still pre-arbitration.
Right.
So he's not going to cost you a lot of money. I think he only costs a handful of millions, like 4 or 5 million. Maybe he'll make 10 to 12 million next year. I have no idea, but he's going to be pretty cheap. And then it's him and really Shota Imanaga. These are some of the more valuable pitchers in the bigs in terms of how much they cost versus how much WAR they're creating from the pitching side. So that's, to me, it's those two. I don't know if you have any two before we wrap up, or any pitchers or players you think are untouchable.
Just kind of looking ahead to the youth movement. Like I wouldn't trade Owen Casey.
Oh, so in a buy-side trade, yeah.
Yeah, I really want to see that through, and I want to see him make it to the bigs and play for the Cubs, because there's been so much hype around him, and to like let go of that, to me that'd be a really tough pill to swallow as far as like a prospect trade.
That's what we said about Brandon Davis 2 years ago. Look,
Brandon Davis, yeah.
Look what happened to him.
Yeah, he's also one of my untouchables.
It's more like he's untouchable because he can't stay on the field.
Yes. And Dansby is also
can't touch a bat.
Yeah, there you go.
AAA.
Can't touch this
without breaking his own back.
No. Otherwise, not really. Just this season has really broken me. Okay. I don't care at this point who we trade, except for Steele. Like you said, he's got a lot of control. It's going to be cheap. Imanaga's great. His value has been tremendous. I mean, I think he was projected to have a 3.5 or 4 ERA. Like there was not a lot of great projections. I think he's sub 3 right now.
Right.
I want to say he's like
really good.
2.98 or 2.96, something like that. Like he's, I don't know if it's that low, but anyways, but yeah, he'd be great. Obviously, not to touch. Steele. Those are good untouchables. So, just copying you. Copy and paste. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us again here on the Brotherly Cubs podcast. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, or join the conversation with us on Twitter at Brotherly Cubs or Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm your big brother, John.
And I'm your little brother, Zach.
We will see you next week as we recap the series with the Cincinnati Reds. That's a 4-game set, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So big series. Hopefully we can gain some momentum from that and keep pushing forward. Until next time, thanks for tuning into the pod, and we will catch you later.
Listen to this crowd.